Someone replies a little slower than usual, and your mind is already halfway to a conclusion. Not just that they are busy, not just that they are distracted, but that they are moving on, that someone else is becoming more important, that your place is somehow less secure than it looked 5 minutes ago. And what is strange is that sometimes nothing dramatic has even happened. No betrayal, no obvious rejection, no clear sign, just a small shift in tone, a delayed message, a change in energy, and suddenly your thoughts begin to race as if you are watching yourself become replaceable in real time. Why does that happen? Why can one tiny social signal feel so much bigger than it should? Why do some people notice distance, exclusion, or indifference long before anyone else does? And why does the feeling of being replaced hurt in such a specific way, as if it is not just about losing a person, but losing your place in the world around them? This is one of those experiences that many people carry quietly. They do not always talk about it because it sounds dramatic when spoken out loud, but internally, it is not dramatic at all. It feels logical. It feels like self-protection. It feels like your mind is simply noticing a pattern early enough to survive it. And that hidden reason matters because the fear of being replaced is usually not about neediness in the simple sense people talk about. It is not just low self-esteem. It is not just overthinking. In psychology, these words are often used too quickly, as if labeling a feeling is the same as understanding it. It is not. Very often, the real explanation is deeper, older, and far more intelligent than it first appears. Because when you feel replaced easily, your mind may not actually be asking, "Do they still like me?" It may be asking something more fundamental. Am I still safe here? Am I still significant? Do I still exist in the same way in their inner world? That sounds intense, but human beings are social creatures in a very literal sense. Our nervous systems do not treat relationships as decoration, they treat them as infrastructure. Belonging is not a luxury, it is part of how we regulate emotion, predict safety, and organize memory, identity, and behavior. So when that sense of belonging begins to wobble, even slightly, your brain does not always interpret it as a small social inconvenience. Sometimes it interprets it as a threat. And if you have ever felt embarrassed by how strongly you react to this kind of thing, it helps to understand that there is a difference between overreacting and being highly trained by experience. That is the hidden part most people miss. Many people think sensitivity to replacement comes from weakness, but often it comes from adaptation, from learning, consciously or unconsciously, that attention can disappear, that affection can shift, that people can emotionally leave before they physically leave, and that if you do not notice the signs early, you get hurt later. So your mind learns to scan. It watches for changes in voice, warmth, timing, enthusiasm, effort, and priority. It notices when someone uses to tell you first and now tells someone else first. It notices when jokes are different, eye contact is shorter, plans become looser, and your name appears less often in their daily life. It notices all of this before you even have words for it. And then, because the brain dislikes uncertainty, it starts filling in the blanks. They found someone better. I was only temporarily useful. I am easy to swap out. It was never as meaningful as I thought. This is where a lot of suffering begins, not with the event itself, but with the interpretation. Now, to understand why this happens so powerfully, we have to look at a few things psychology has been explaining for decades. One of them is attachment. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth and many others, begins with a simple but profound idea. Our early relationships do not just teach us how to love, they teach us what to expect from closeness itself. They shape our basic assumptions about availability, stability, and whether connection is something we can trust. If care was consistent, the nervous system learns that relationships can stretch without breaking. If care was unpredictable, attention could feel unstable from the beginning. Warmth might appear, disappear, return, and disappear again. Affection may have been real, but inconsistent. Presence may have existed, but not always when needed. And when this happens, the mind often develops a very specific habit. It becomes vigilant, not because it wants drama, because it wants predictability. A person with this kind of social vigilance may become especially alert to signs of withdrawal. They are not imagining everything. In fact, they are often unusually accurate at detecting subtle shifts in emotion and behavior. But the problem is that detection and mental interpretation are not the same thing. You can perceive something real and still explain it in a way that harms you. This is why two people can experience the same event very differently. Someone takes 3 hours to respond. One person thinks they are probably busy. Another thinks something changed. The difference is not intelligence. It is not maturity. It is not even simply confidence. It is history. Your brain does not react to situations as they are. It reacts to situations plus memory. And memory is not only what you consciously remember, it is also what your body has learned to expect. This is where the hidden reason becomes clearer. You may feel replaced easily because your nervous system has learned that closeness is conditional. Conditional on being useful, conditional on being entertaining, conditional on not being too emotional, conditional on reading the room correctly, conditional on adapting fast enough to remain wanted. When that becomes your social blueprint, relationships stop feeling like places where you can simply exist. They become places where you must maintain relevance, and if relevance feels like the price of love, then being replaced will not feel like an unfortunate possibility. It will feel like the natural consequence of relaxing for even a moment. That creates a very exhausting inner life, because now every social change has meaning. Every delay can become a sign. Every comparison becomes a threat. Every new person in someone's life can trigger the question, what do they give that I don't? And every silence becomes a stage on which your mind performs its oldest fear. This is also why reassurance often helps only briefly. Someone tells you, no, you're important to me, and maybe you believe them for an hour, maybe for a day, but then the next small shift arrives, and the same anxiety returns. Why? Because reassurance can calm a thought, but it does not always repair the system that generated the thought. If the deeper issue is that your sense of worth has become tied to your position in other people's attention, then temporary comfort will not fully solve it. The fear keeps returning because the mind is still using external signals to answer an internal question. Am I secure? Am I enough? Am I still chosen? And human relationships, by nature, are full of shifting signals. People get tired, busy, preoccupied, stressed, less expressive, more inward. Sometimes they care deeply and still communicate poorly. Sometimes they love you and fail to show it well. Sometimes their behavior changes for reasons that have nothing to do with your value. But if your perception has been trained by instability, the mind rarely begins there. It begins with threat. Psychology has a term related to this called rejection sensitivity. Researchers like Geraldine Downey and Scott Feldman described it as a tendency to anxiously expect, readily perceive, and intensely react to rejection. Notice the sequence there. Expect, perceive, react. That first part is everything. When the mind expects rejection, it becomes more likely to interpret ambiguous events through that lens, not because you are irrational, but because the brain is designed to prioritize possible danger over comfortable uncertainty. If there is a chance you are being pushed out, your mind would rather detect it too early than too late. From a survival perspective, that makes sense. From an emotional perspective, it can be brutal, because once you expect replacement, you begin seeing evidence everywhere. Not always false evidence, but selectively highlighted evidence. The new friend, the changed tone, the shorter conversations, the enthusiasm that used to come naturally and now feels thinner. And then another mechanism appears: social comparison. Leon Festinger's work on social comparison showed that people naturally evaluate themselves in relation to others. We look sideways to understand our position. In healthy moments, this is ordinary. In insecure moments, it becomes painful, especially in relationships. If someone you care about seems excited by another person, your mind may not just notice their connection, it may treat that connection as a referendum on your own value. If they enjoy them this much, what does that say about me? If they can get this from someone else, what is unique about me? If I am not irreplaceable, do I matter less? That last question is particularly important because many people secretly believe that being loved should mean being singular, completely unmatched, impossible to substitute. Psychologically, this makes sense. We want stable bonds. We want to feel chosen in a way that does not evaporate the moment something newer, easier, or shinier appears. But here is the problem. No healthy relationship is secured by being objectively impossible to replace in every dimension. Human beings do not stay because nobody else exists. They stay because of meaning, history, trust, emotional investment, and the unique reality built between two specific people over time. The mind that fears replacement often forgets this. It reduces connection to comparative value, to performance, to rank, and rank is always unstable. There is also another hidden layer that many people do not notice. Sometimes the fear of being replaced is not only about abandonment, it is about invisibility. These are not exactly the same. Abandonment says, "You are leaving me." Invisibility says, "You no longer truly see me." For some people, this is the real wound. They can tolerate distance more than they can tolerate being emotionally overlooked. They can tolerate less time together more than they can tolerate the feeling that someone's inner attention has shifted elsewhere. That hurts because identity is social in ways we rarely admit. We partly know ourselves through reflected recognition, through being remembered, considered, included, and mentally held in the emotional world of others. When that reflection weakens, something inside us can feel less solid. This is why being replaced can feel like a threat to the self, not just to the relationship. It can trigger old doubts about significance, uniqueness, and whether your presence leaves any lasting imprint at all. And if that sounds familiar, there may be another pattern involved: conditional self-worth. Researchers in self-esteem psychology have found that many people do not possess a stable sense of value that stays relatively intact across changing circumstances. Instead, their self-worth becomes contingent, dependent, tied to achievement, approval, attractiveness, productivity, or relational importance. If your self-esteem is built heavily on being needed, wanted, or emotionally central, then any sign that you are becoming less central will feel like personal collapse. Not because you are vain, because your identity has been outsourced. Your mind may have learned, somewhere along the way, that being important to others is the safest proof that you are important at all. So of course, being replaced feels devastating. It is not only the loss of a role, it threatens the structure that has been holding up your sense of self. This also explains why some people become extremely helpful, agreeable, funny, insightful, low maintenance, or emotionally available in relationships. These traits can be genuine, but sometimes they are also strategies, ways of maintaining position, ways of staying indispensable. If I am easy to love, maybe I will not be left. If I am useful enough, maybe I will not be forgotten. If I need very little, maybe I will not become burdensome. If I can anticipate everyone's emotional needs, maybe no one will turn away. These are not random habits. They are often brilliant adaptations, but they come with a hidden cost. When your behavior is organized around remaining unreplaceable, closeness stops feeling restful. It becomes labor. You are always adjusting, monitoring, managing, editing, always trying to stay one step ahead of the moment someone realizes they could do without you. That can produce anxiety, resentment, loneliness, and a strange kind of emotional exhaustion, because even when people love you, part of you feels as though the love is secured by performance, and anything secured by performance can be lost through imperfection. This is why people who fear replacement often struggle to relax into ordinary affection. A compliment may feel good, but not final. A promise may sound kind, but not fully convincing. A bond may feel deep, but not safe. There is another nuance here, and it matters. Sometimes you feel replaced easily because in your past, you actually were. Maybe not in a dramatic movie scene way, but in repeated, smaller ways. A caregiver was emotionally preoccupied. A sibling took up all the oxygen in the room. A friend group shifted and never fully came back. A partner slowly invested elsewhere before the relationship officially ended. A parent paid attention when you excelled and withdrew when you struggled. A person you trusted made you feel interchangeable. When experiences like these happen repeatedly, the mind does not store them as isolated disappointments. It builds a model, and once that model exists, your perception changes. You start looking for the signs early. You develop habits of emotional prediction. You may become skeptical, hyper-aware, guarded, or unusually responsive to changes in social energy. To other people, this can look like insecurity, but from the inside, it often feels like pattern recognition. And to be fair, sometimes it is. Not every fear of replacement is invented. Sometimes your intuition catches real shifts before your conscious mind wants to admit them. People do drift. They do reorient their attention. They do form new attachments and neglect old ones. They do become less invested while still acting polite. Human behavior is full of quiet exits, so the goal is not to become less perceptive. It is to become more accurate. That is a very different task. Accuracy means learning how to separate current reality from old expectation. It means noticing a sign without instantly worshiping it as proof. It means making room for multiple explanations. It means understanding that sensitivity can be a strength, but only if it is not steering the whole vehicle by itself. This is where self-awareness becomes powerful. When you feel that familiar fear rising, you can begin asking different questions. What exactly happened? What am I assuming? What does this remind me of? Am I reacting only to this moment or also to a much older emotional memory? Do I feel replaced or do I feel uncertain? Those are not always the same. Uncertainty is hard for the human mind. We would often rather have a painful conclusion than an open question. I'm being replaced can feel more tolerable than I don't know what this means yet, because uncertainty leaves us suspended, and the nervous system does not enjoy suspension. But emotional intelligence often requires staying there a little longer, not forever, just long enough to see more clearly. It also helps to understand something that can sound simple but is psychologically profound. Being replaceable in function is not the same as being replaceable in meaning. Someone else may also be funny. Someone else may also be kind. Someone else may also listen well, text quickly, share interests, offer support, or understand a certain part of the other person's life. But no one occupies your exact history. No one carries your exact emotional fingerprint in another person's memory. No one is you in the lived texture of shared experience. The fear of replacement often comes from treating relationships like markets, where every person is a collection of traits competing against better offers. But human attachment does not work like that, at least not when it is healthy. Meaning accumulates, familiarity matters, emotional memory matters, safety matters. The small rituals, private language, old pain survived together, strange jokes, forgiven mistakes, and moments no one else witnessed all matter. When people lose sight of that, they start living in competition with ghosts, and that is exhausting. So what can actually begin to fix this? Not perfection, not becoming impossible to replace, not controlling everyone more carefully, not pretending not to care, and not shaming yourself every time the fear appears. The first real shift is understanding that this feeling is not random. It is connected to psychology, attachment, memory, self-esteem, and learned social behavior. It has a reason, and when you understand the reason, the feeling loses some of its mystery. The second shift is building worth that is not entirely dependent on relational ranking. That means developing a stronger internal relationship with yourself, not in the cliché sense, but in the practical sense. Learning to experience your value as something more stable than whether you are currently the favorite, the closest, the first text, the chosen one in every moment. This does not mean relationships stop mattering. They always will. It means your entire identity is no longer at the mercy of tiny fluctuations in other people's attention. The third shift is tolerating ambiguity better. This is hard, especially for anxious minds, but it matters. A delayed response is not a verdict. A new friendship is not immediate displacement. A quieter week is not always emotional abandonment. Some signs are signs, others are simply life being uneven. The fourth shift is learning to ask for clarity instead of living only inside silent interpretation. Sometimes, the most painful habits grow in the dark. We assume, decode, rehearse, and spiral, but never actually communicate. A calm question can reveal more than 10 hours of anxious thinking. And finally, it helps to grieve what taught you to fear replacement in the first place, because often this reaction is not about one friend, one partner, one message, or one moment. It is about an older loneliness finally finding language. A child version of you may have learned that attention was scarce. A younger version of you may have learned that connection could vanish without explanation. A past version of you may have learned that being loved did not necessarily mean being kept. If that is true, then the goal is not to mock your sensitivity. It is to understand it, to see it for what it is, a protective system built by experience, carrying both intelligence and pain. And once you see that, something changes. You stop asking, "Why am I like this?" And you start asking, "What has this part of me been trying to prevent?" That question is softer, smarter, more honest, because the part of you that fears being replaced is usually not trying to sabotage your life. It is trying to save you from an old wound it does not trust the present to handle. But the present is not always the past, and learning that may be one of the most important forms of healing there is. So if you often feel replaced too easily, do not rush to call yourself dramatic, insecure, clingy, or broken. Those labels explain very little. Look deeper. Look at your habits, your attachment patterns, your memory, your social experiences, your self-esteem, your anxiety, your need for significance, and the private rules you may have inherited about what makes you worth keeping. There is often a hidden reason, a real one, a human one, and once you understand it, you may discover something quietly life-changing. You were never simply too much. You may have just become highly skilled at detecting the possibility of loss. The task now is not to become numb, it is to become safe enough inside yourself that every shift no longer feels like a disappearance. That is a different kind of strength, not the strength of never needing people, not the strength of pretending you do not care, but the strength of caring without collapsing, of noticing without assuming, of valuing connection without turning it into proof of your existence. And maybe that is the deeper explanation behind all of this. The fear of being replaced is rarely just about other people leaving. It is often about the terror of becoming emotionally unreal in their eyes, and then, for a moment, in your own. But you are not made real only by being chosen. You are not valuable only when prioritized, and you are not ordinary just because other people are capable of loving more than one person, or changing, or drifting, or being inconsistent. Your value was never supposed to depend entirely on your position in someone else's attention. The more deeply you understand that, the less every social tremor will feel like an earthquake, and the next time your mind tells you that a small shift means you are being replaced, you may pause long enough to ask a better question. Not, how do I become impossible to lose, but why does this feel like losing myself?